Hello friends, welcome to the wonderful world of stories and why we tell them from Culture Katha. In this series, as you know, we are looking at many interesting but unexplored aspects of the great Indian epic, the Mahabharata. In today's video, we are going to be looking at the Ramayana. Yes, you heard me right, the Ramayana. Not Valmiki's, but Vyasa's. The story of Rama as found in the Mahabharata. As I had already mentioned in my first introductory video on the epic, apart from the core story of the conflict between the Pandavas and the Kauravas, the Mahabharata narrates several other stories called Upakyanas, and Rama's story or Ramopakhyana is one of those. Interesting, isn't it, that the story of one of the greatest epics of India is also found in another. But what's more interesting is how this version of the epic is very different from Valmiki's Ramayana. And that's exactly what we are going to be looking at in this video. Friends, I've already covered several versions of the Ramayana in my previous videos. For those who have not watched them yet and want to catch up on them, I have given a link to the videos in the description box below. Please do check it out. So if Rama's story narrated in the Mahabharata is different from Valmiki's, can we call it Vyasa's version? Not really. According to scholars, Ramopakhyana may not have been a part of the earliest version of the Mahabharata when it was Jaya or Bharata, but may well have been added later, sometime in the epic's long period of evolution. So it will be incorrect to attribute this version of Ramakatha to Vyasa. But why does Rama's story feature in the epic? Is it of any relevance to the larger story of the epic? Well, with the Mahabharata, one thing is certain. All the stories featuring in it, whoever they were composed by, sits perfectly in the context of the main story. Let me explain how. Rama's story is narrated in the Aranyaka or Vanaparvan of the epic when the Pandavas are on exile after having been defeated by the Kauravas in the game of dice. As if the trials and tribulations the Pandavas were facing in the forest were not enough, Jayadratha, the king of Sindhu Desha and husband of the Kaurava sister Dushala, had tried to exploit the vulnerable situation of the Pandavas by making an attempt to abduct Draupadi. Thanks to Bhima and Arjuna, his attempt is foiled and Draupadi is rescued. Yudhishtra gets extremely upset over this incident and expresses his helplessness and anguish over his miserable situation to sage Markandeya. Yudhishtra asks Markandeya if any other man in the world could be more unfortunate than him. And this is when sage Markandeya narrates to him the story of Rama, his exile, his wife's abduction, his long and desperate search for her, his war with Ravana, and finally his victory over the Rakshasa. The sage tells Yudhishthira how Rama, with just one of his brothers to help him and very limited resources, that too in the form of bears and monkeys, managed to win the war with Ravana. Whereas Yudhishthira had the support of his four valiant brothers, including great warriors like Arjuna and Bhima. The sage points out to Yudhishthira that he is way better off than Rama and would certainly be able to win the war against the Kauravas one day. So it was to infuse Yudhishthira with hope that Markandeya narrated the story of Rama to him. But as I mentioned earlier, what makes Ramopakhyana more interesting is that it's quite different from the Valmiki version, which is often considered to be the original text. Let's now look at some of the most important differences between the two versions. In the Ramopakhyana, the story of Ravana's lineage and birth is told in the very beginning, along with the birth story of Rama. Whereas in the Valmiki Ramayana, the story of Ravana's birth is narrated only in the Uttarakanda, the last chapter, which is believed to be a later addition to the epic. Interestingly, in Ramopakhyana, there are more verses devoted to narrating Ravana's birth story and lineage than Rama's. In any case, the narrative style of Ramopakhyana is in line with the structure of the Sambhava Parvan that forms part of the Adi Parvan of the epic, where the birth stories of all the key characters, including those of the Pandavas and the Kauravas, are narrated. On the other hand, Valmiki's Ramayana does not follow this structure. The Balakanda tells us only the birth stories of Rama and his brothers and the birth of Sita, and not of Ravana, his siblings, or other key characters of the epic. Which brings us to Manthara, the character responsible for Rama's exile. In Ramopakhyana, a Gandharvi named Dundubi is ordered by Brahma to take birth on earth as Manthara to play her role in the slaying of Ravana. In Valmiki's epic, Manthara has no such origin story. Now for some big misses in the Ramopakhyana. Being a truncated version of the Ramayana, comprising only about 700 odd verses compared to Valmiki's 24,000, Ramopakhyana does not tell us the story of Vishwamitra taking Rama to the forest to fight Tataka and her Rakshasa sons. Once again, probably for brevity's sake, elaboration of the marriage of Rama and Sita is also left out. In the Valmiki Ramayana, when Rama kills Vali while he was engaged in a duel with his brother Sugriva, Vali is aggrieved and demands to know why Rama killed him treacherously, hiding up in the trees. And Rama gives him a long explanation why he did not consider it adharma to kill Vali from his hiding place. In Ramopakhyana, this conversation does not take place. Yet another interesting aspect of the Ramopakhyana is that Vibhishana is not depicted as a traitor who flees from Lanka after being banished by his elder brother Ravana. Instead, much earlier in the story, he goes away with his step-brother Kubera, and later into the tale, he approaches Rama directly to join him in his fight against Ravana. In the Ramopakhyana, when Ravana's son Indrajit is killed in the battle, an angry and vengeful Ravana tries to kill Sita, but is stopped by Avindhya, an aging and wise Rakshasa much respected by Ravana. Avindhya warns Ravana not to kill a woman, that too a woman who's anyway almost dead, pining away for her husband. Avindhya urges Ravana to go kill Rama instead. Ravana accepts Avindhya's counsel and drops his idea to kill Sita. This episode does not feature in the Valmiki Ramayana. Now for the most important difference of all. Rama of the Valmiki Ramayana is often accused of making Sita take the trial by fire to prove her chastity. Not so in the Ramopakhyana. In the story of Rama narrated in the Mahabharata too, when Sita is freed from Ravana's Ashokamana and brought to Rama, Rama refuses to accept her. He says that his duty was only to free her from captivity, and she was now free to go anywhere she wished. But he could never take back a woman who would spend some time in the house of another man. Hearing this, Sita faints. Everyone is astounded. None of them had expected this. Then Lord Brahma makes an appearance and makes a case for Sita, saying that Ravana could never have violated Sita physically because he had a curse on his head. Ravana's curse was that he could never touch another woman without her consent, and if he did, his head would break into 1,000 pieces. Hearing this, Rama is convinced of Sita's purity and agrees to accept her. So in the Ramopakhyana, Sita does not take the trial by fire, but is proved of her innocence through the story of Ravana's curse. Sita is spared yet another ordeal in the Ramopakhyana, the ordeal of banishment during her pregnancy. Unlike the Valmiki Ramayana, the Ramopakhyana ends on a happy note with the coronation of Rama and mention of the various Vedic sacrifices he performed. This probably was a good place for sage Markandeya to stop the narration. After all, he was telling Yudhishtra Rama's story only to console him and give him hope about winning the war with the Kauravas. Listening to the story of Rama, Yudhishtra overcomes his grief and is instilled with hope for the future. Now, why are there so many differences between Valmiki's Ramayana and the version that we find in the Mahabharata? Well, that's a big question and probably calls for another video which we shall do at a later date. But friends, I hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, please do like and share, and do subscribe to the channel if you have not done so yet. Subscriber friends, please press the bell icon to receive notifications on new video uploads. And do stay with me on this epic journey exploring the greatest story ever told. Till we meet again, it's tada bye bye. Take care.